So talking about the greatness of Jupiter, the great benefic, gives our life meaning, purpose, hope, but it can also lead to disappointment, bypassing. Check this out. So in this video, I'm talking about the greatness of Jupiter and its great beneficial qualities and why Jupiter is such a blessing in our life and why it's considered, even in Western astrology and all forms of astrology, to be the great benefic, as it's said, the great beneficial energy. And I'm also going to talk about how it can be difficult in certain ways and how even something benevolent can be an obstacle, okay? So the one thing you want to really understand about Jupiter more than anything else is it brings a sense of hope. And what happens when we have hope? Well, we can overcome the difficulties of the world, of life, because life is going to kick us to the curb at times. We're going to suffer disappointment, which is another big Jupiter keyword. I hardly ever hear this talked about, but I always mention it. You see, planetary energies are a range of things. Jupiter is not just hope, it's disappointment, because our hopes are what get disappointed. We only become disappointed because we hoped for something else. We hoped that it would be this, and it wasn't that, so now we're disappointed. Now you're saying, well, Sam, I thought this was all the greatness and the benevolence. Where's all the benevolence in being disappointed? Well, because then we find something better to pin our hopes onto. And again, everything in astrology is an evolution. All of the planets are evolutionary forces. This is an anchoring principle, a universal principle that I teach in my courses. In my certification course, there's the evolutionary process of everything. Things evolve through body, mind, and spirit. This is also what's called principle stacking, which you hear me talk about. One of the principles is the planets themselves. Jupiter is a principle. It's an evolving principle, and things evolve through body, mind, and spirit, through a sense of separateness and personal identity, which would be body, emotional, which then we connect with other people, and then spirit, which is the highest realm. So with Jupiter, again, Jupiter gives us a sense of hope. That sense of hope also gives us a direction and a purpose, not just in life, but even in different facets of life. Like, for example, in our relationship. We can lose hope in our relationship, in our partner. And if we lose hope in our partnership, then we don't know where it's going or why we're doing it anymore. This is Jupiter. Why? Why am I doing this? What's the purpose of this? What's the point of this? Notice how Jupiter is also the indicator of children. And notice how children give a relationship a very clear why. Why are we in this relationship? Because we're raising children. Boom. Right away, we have a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of hope. We know why we're doing it because we're raising children. So, for example, all relationships need a connection to Jupiter. We need to know why we're doing it, because after a while, no matter how hot somebody is, the sex and the good feeling and all that is going to be normalized after a while. And then you're going to have to have something deeper to keep you on track with the relationship. And it's going to have to be something related to Jupiter. You're going to have to feel like you're creating something together. Again, children is the most immediate, but it can also be a spiritual bond. This is why people in their relationships break up at some point. Especially like after the kids are raised, then we realize that we had nothing in common anymore. We weren't really going in the same direction anymore. The things that motivated them didn't motivate me. And people will separate because of different, what we would call spiritual directions. And it's usually about God or money or some version of that. They were more materialistic and just wanting to enjoy life, but I'm more spiritual and wanted to go here. Again, this is a Jupiter problem that is easily solved by children in a relationship. So I'm using the relationship as an example of a Jupiter sense of purpose and direction. So Jupiter gives us hope for something. And we're hopeful that if we keep with it, it'll work out and it'll take us where we want to go. That's what hope gives us. It gives us a sense of purpose, a direction, a meaning. There's a meaning of why we're fighting all the time. There's a deeper meaning. We're working through something that's important. That's more important than right now that we're living. These fights and all of that, there's something more meaningful behind it all because we're both, whatever, we're raising the kids or we have the same gurus or the same spiritual beliefs. And there's some philosophy, Jupiter philosophies, that is bigger than just this moment that we're living. Because as I said, these moments that we're living are going to kick us to the curb at times. They're going to be hard. And when Jupiter is weak, we forget our purpose or we don't have a very good one. So I use the relationships, but also, of course, work is a big one. What's the purpose of all this work? Why am I doing it? What's the bigger picture? Right? And ultimately, it's life. Why are we here? Ultimately, this is why Jupiter is related to your philosophies, your teachings, your teachers, and his Sanskrit name is Guru for a reason. Guru is the dispeller of darkness, the remover of that darkness, and that thing that keeps us on track and gives us a sense of hope and purpose and meaning. And so I mentioned earlier about the whole, disappointment factor that gets overlooked. Notice how many, if we talk in a higher sense, like about your highest beliefs, like, Jupiter as the guru, like the Satguru. Notice how many times in your life your sense of meaning and purpose has changed. Think about what your meaning and purpose was when you were 10 years old. And you had one. You literally did have one. I remember the comedian Jerry Seinfeld did one of his skits. And it reminded me of this. It's like, I remember when I was a kid, the whole meaning of life was to get candy, get candy, get candy. Where's candy? Get the candy, get candy. Like that was my whole reason for living, was to get candy. Right? No, but think about your purpose and notice when things started to really inspire you and motivate you when you were a kid. I remember with myself, the first things that I kind of lived for, that inspired me, that filled me with joy and excitement and inspiration. Often it revolves around things like our heroes, right? Like, comic book heroes and people that we admire. It's very much about celebrities and people that inspire us, that we kind of worship. When we're younger, we project a lot of that Jupiter onto these idols, musical idols, or like I remember for myself, there's been a very linear progression. I remember the first thing that I really loved that really inspired me. Again, think about children as well. Children are the thing we really love the most, and that love connects us to the source of love itself. This is why the love we have for our children connects us to the source of love itself and that inspiring purpose, that there's something bigger than just my little life. And so it becomes a very abstract thing. For myself, the first thing that I really loved that was bigger than me was baseball. Baseball. I would dream about not being a baseball player per se, although I loved playing baseball. I didn't really fantasize that I would be a baseball player when I got older, oddly enough, because probably many of my friends did, but just the romance with all the baseball players. I grew up in Baltimore where they had a great baseball team. The Baltimore Orioles of the 70s. When I grew up, Brooks Robinson, Jim Palmer, Frank Robinson, Mark Belanger, all these. And I also loved another baseball team. I actually, even though I lived in Baltimore, I loved the Oakland A's. Reggie Jackson and Bert Campaneris and all that. And so I had these baseball cards, and I would just look at my baseball cards all the time. Look at my baseball cards. I'd check the baseball scores. I'd get magazines Baseball Digest. So that was like, to me, it was something bigger. It was like, these are gods. Think about it. They were gods. Even now, I go back and I like look at, you know, the highlights from, you know, those times, and it's like mythic and this archetypal mythology in the mind of a young child, and of a young boy. You know, it's really amazing because, but you know, that's very Jupiter. That's very Jupiterian. I remember when Mickey Mantle died. Mickey Mantle, who was a famous baseball player for the New York Yankees, died in the, I think it was mid-90s or late 90s. And he was a hero to a whole generation of Americans. And one of them was the announcer named Bob Costas, who was pretty famous. And he grew up loving Mickey Mantle. And he actually became Mickey Mantle's great friend. And he gave a eulogy at Mickey Mantle's funeral that was just amazing. Maybe listen to it, just if you want to hear, whether you know Mickey Mantle or Bob Costas or not, just to hear him talk about what Mickey Mantle meant to him as a young boy. And he says something like this, and I'm just paraphrasing, but he said, watching Mickey circling the bases at Yankee Stadium after hitting a home run on a Sunday afternoon as the sun is setting was epic. Before we even knew what epic was, there was something epic about that. Think about, there's something epic about life. Something epic. That's bigger than just, here I am watching TV. There's just something epic, something big that's going on. And we project that onto something. And I started this, you know, talking about like the disappointments, you know, like the disappointments and the hopes. Maybe, and again, I wasn't disappointed by baseball, but I just moved on to the next thing. The next thing that I really loved and had this romance for was music. Particularly, again, I grew up in I think maybe the best era for music ever, which was the mid-70s, you know, and I was in high school at that time. So I was in high school in like, you know, like junior high and high school, middle school in the mid-70s. So I saw all of these amazing bands that we now know of. I saw them all sort of start from nothing. And it was just typical. It was just normal to see all of these amazing bands start. And so, you know, that was my jam. You know, I started playing music. I started playing bass guitar when I was like 13, 14 years old. And it was, I mean, what a time to start doing it, like 1977, you know, like when it was like Led Zeppelin was still releasing albums, and Rush and AC/DC and ZZ Top and the Eagles and Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. They were all contemporary. They were all still very active and doing some of the greatest work. So all of that, like, not to mention all the new wave was coming with Bowie and all of the Elvis Costello and all of that punk and Pink Floyd and every band you can imagine was all just blowing up then. So of course, you know, it was such an amazing time, and that the romance attached to that, you know, I would get every week or every 2 weeks, I think it came, was called Circus Magazine. I would get it in the mail and just look at that and again, just dream. It wasn't even that I was dreaming I was going to do it one day. I had no idea what I was going to do one day. It wasn't that. It was, you know, smoking pot and just imagining, wow, these guys, these are like gods. Again, I'm talking about this, you know, it's my personal take on it, but you have a version of this too. Think about like when you were, like your first love, maybe like when you were 9, 10 years old, like it was with me with baseball, something very rudimentary. Maybe it was something like with like a musician or like a singer or something. And then as you got in your teenage years, maybe it was something different. You know, with me, it went from baseball to then music. It stayed music for quite a while. But actually in my early 20s, then it became actually things like actual spiritual practices. It's not like I was disappointed by those other things because they still maintained a certain point. But the thing was they weren't big enough anymore. As I matured and I got bigger in my mind and consciousness, these things just showed themselves to be fun or entertaining, or they showed themselves to be what they were. As I got bigger and I got more mature, they got smaller in my consciousness. My consciousness needed to expand more than just the romance of a rock star or of an athlete, and it wanted to connect with something much more transcendent. So with myself in my early 20s, I actually started doing a lot of meditation, deep meditation, and real gurus. And that sort of catapulted it into that realm. But you see how those things that we worship and idolize, and that it gives us a sense of expansion and hope, that is what Jupiter is about. And make no mistake, I had a difficult childhood. It was hard. And the times I would go in my room and look at my baseball cards and listen to this music and imagine this beautiful energy that's there was very much an escape from where I was at that time. You know, I started my Saturn Dasha when I was 9. Parents broke up, there was abuse, there was just no, I wasn't being treated very well. But my world of, well, this is what's in the world. This is what's in the world somewhere. There's all this beautiful, you know, there's these great athletes and this amazing thing going on and this music. Again, at the time in my immature mind, that's not how I thought about it, but that's what was going on. That's what Jupiter is. It's giving hope for the future. And as sad and desperate as I was when I was a teenager and when I was younger, which was a lot, you know, I never ever really contemplated suicide or anything like that, or any kind of, things were really, really hard. But I'm lucky I do have a powerful Jupiter. It's in Pisces in the 10th house. So I always had a sense of hope. Even though the circumstances in the present were hard, there was a sense of hope. And this is what Jupiter really gives. But the question to ask is, what is giving you hope? This is why I said it can be, like everything, it can be a double-edged sword. It can be difficult as well. Because we can have hope for things that are not worth it. Because we can also just pin our hopes on things like making a lot of money and being successful and very mundane worldly things. And by the way, it's one of the reasons that Jupiter has its debilitation sign of Capricorn, just as as an archetype. Capricorn is about materialism and all the practical worries and concerns of the world, which may make Jupiter just materialistic and think that the only thing that's worth growing and that's worth expanding toward and that's higher is something material and practical, usually money. You know, there was a great song by 9 Inch Nails called Head Like a Hole. God, money, I'll do anything for you. God, money, just tell me what you want me to. He says, God, money. We have to understand this is one of the biggest things that people do, where there's a saying, or maybe it's not a saying, maybe it's just something that I realized, that we're either worshiping usually God or money. It's hard to do both. It's very hard to reconcile the two. But both of them are the same. This abstract feeling of growth and expansion and hope and optimism. And what's giving us hope? And how does that show the trajectory of my life and where it's going? Because in the highest sense, we need to realize that where our life is really going is in the grave. Because most of us are defined by our limited self, our limited body, our limited understanding, and we don't want to face the fact of where ultimately this whole game is going. You know, the great benefit of my difficult childhood is it made me aware of those things really early. So as much as I love my baseball and I love my singers and my music, ultimately in the back of my mind I was like, yeah, but this isn't really what's going on. This is all going to end. You're all going to die one day. And I've always had that awareness. Part of it is because I have Saturn in Capricorn aspecting that Jupiter in Pisces. So I always had a pretty deep awareness that we could all be dead at any moment. And the Saturn's also aspecting my moon. So this is Saturn's influence, is to kind of be a real buzzkill and destroy all of the illusions that can come with Jupiterian hope. Oh, I'm so hopeful that I don't have to pay attention to all this stuff that's happening here on Earth. Because I got my kids, I got my money, and I got this, and I'm going there. You ever notice how people act like they're going to live forever? Oh, I'm so hopeful about this and hopeful about that, and I'm like 95 years old and still trying to survive it. You're not going to survive it. So again, Jupiter can get very much into this bypassing mentality if we're not careful. Needs to be tempered with the realism. And this is then how Jupiter and that optimism and hope and joy of life and that enthusiasm and passion for life itself leads to great teachings and gurus and great systems and philosophies that are worth sacrificing your life and your time for. Because this is the other thing about Jupiter, why he's the great benefic, is it's the thing we love so much that we spend all of our time doing it. We can spend all of our time doing it. I spent all my free time with my baseball cards and thinking about that and dreaming about it because it was so compelling. Or music. Look at how people are with their kids. My kids are everything. My kids are everything to me. Okay, great. But they're really not everything. They're people, and your life is passing you by. At some point, again, we get so much out of that joy of Jupiter. Again, even in a more in a less passionate or enthusiastic or positive way, things like pursuing money, pursuing wealth, thinking this is what my sense of meaning and purpose is to keep expanding and growing this way. And we're wasting time. It needs to be connected with something higher and not just bypassing all of that yucky stuff also, which is a big thing of what Jupiter is actually helping us rise above. Jupiter is the thing that allows you to rise above all of that difficulty. So it can also lead you to bypassing it altogether and saying, oh no, I'm not worried. And you'll hear people say it, I'm not worried about death because I'm this and that. And you can see they're just not connected. I'm not saying people go around worrying about death or whatever, not just to bring it back to death, but you can see this disconnect often between people's philosophies and not really being grounded in the realities of life. That all of this is going to change at some point. And Jupiter can be so compelling that we don't face it, we don't want to face it, because it's almost like a drug. It's almost addictive to be inspired in that realm. Again, the easiest way to think of parents with their kids, right? And again, it's not a criticism. It's just, it's so compelling and so beautiful that everything else is just kind of put on hold. And we can easily do that. So you need to be aware of that as well. But in a general sense, Jupiter is the great benefic. He really makes life worth living, gives us that sense of hope and purpose and meaning, which is a focal point of our life at any given time. Think of how your focal points have shifted throughout your life and what really was inspiring you at certain times and giving you certain sense of meaning and purpose. And a lot of it gets, especially in this day and age, really wrapped up in the cult of celebrity or politicians and celebrities, where we start repeating their slogans and their sense of direction and purpose. In a worldly sense, it's very much things about politics and leaders and people that give us a sense of hope that the world is going to be better and all like that. But in the highest, most transcendent way, it has to do with these gurus and these teachers and these teachings and actually putting them into practice, right? So you can also see how things like, musicians and entertainers, especially ones that sing certain songs. Think of like a John Lennon type or a David Bowie type, who generate such reverence because of not just their music per se, but like the message and the themes and the things they said that were kind of guideposts in our life that gave us a sense of direction and meaning. But again, ultimately, this is part of the mind that's related to Jupiter, giving us a sense of purpose, meaning, and the teachers and teachings that inspire us. So that's the greatness of Jupiter and his influence on our mind.